session 4 of day 2. So today's is bridging the gap development of early stage systems engineering roles, and we're going to be taken through that by Mark Tickner. So Mark is a chartered engineer and a certified systems engineering professional, CSEP. He graduated from the University of Exeter with a master's in electronic and electrical engineering. Since then, he's had a career spanning over 20 years in systems engineering roles in defence avionics, automotive electronics, and now in railway infrastructure. Currently, he is a requirements management lead for the Skanska Costain Strabag SCS joint venture, which is delivering the London Tunnels section of the HS2 railway, linking the capital, the Midlands, the North, and Scotland. The requirements management team leads the curation and delivery of consistent compliance evidence against the contract requirements technical using specialist tools through support and guidance to delivery teams. Mark is an active volunteer in INCOSE UK, supporting the members as a professional registration advisor, PRA, since 2020, and he's quite recently been appointed as a professional registration interviewer as well. He's an active STEM ambassador, promoting the profession to the next generation of engineers and scientists. In addition to his membership with us at INCOSE UK, he's also a long-standing member of the Institute of Engineering and Technology. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. The good news here is that I'm not going to make you stand up and dance at all, so you don't have to worry about it. But there may be some audience involvement as we go along, so let's see how we do. So, I'm Mark Tickner. I'm, as he introduced me, engineer. I'm on Hazel's Route 1, so I started electrical engineer and found myself into as a systems engineer over a few years. Most of my team, when I came into my role, are very similar, and to give you some background to where I was when I started writing this, between the three of us we had about 60 plus years of experience. And in my terminology, we're all gurus. So, can I see where I'm going? Yeah, let's adjust, that's more friendly. Right, so first of all, some background. We've talked about difficulty in getting engineers into the profession. A lot of us have very typical routes. We start with a degree, we go and do some experience, become systems engineers. And because of the fact when you tailor your jobs, you tailor your job adverts, you're looking at what sort of people you're trying to attract. And since the general person you're looking to attract has got that sort of baseline, you tend to go and put these sort of very similar-ish job adverts out there. So your typical job advert, we're looking at someone with a degree, with some experience in various things. These are some typical ones I turned up from a quick search on LinkedIn. What you don't, interestingly enough, find on LinkedIn very much is adverts for apprentices. I see a few of them here and there, but not very often. Out of interest, are there any apprentices in here? Who wants to put their hands up? We got a few or none? I know there was one here, but I think they may have disappeared off. And the other issue there is that it's not very inclusive, because one of the things I dug out there is that most people who go to university aren't from disadvantaged backgrounds, because it's quite expensive, it's quite involved to get to university, and you need training up to get the right degree, the right qualifications, A levels to get the degree. It tends to think. One of the other statistics I found out was the fact that although there's a fair balance of the proportion of people who go to university who are female, the number of females in engineering is a lot lower. And the other thing that I looked at here is that this doesn't really support career changes very well. So someone who's decided to change their career, it doesn't really go to them. So that's the background. What am I doing today? This presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the functions of what my team does. We're going to look at the roles and how they're aligned. And I looked at apprenticeship levels. That was the obvious one. I'll come to why that is. We look at the competencies for those roles, which is aligned to the INCOSE System Engineering Career Framework. And we look at the competency that people need to perform those functions as well. And then sort of just as a systems engineer, take the broad look, see how it all goes together. Now, I'm going to have to slow down. So let's talk about the function of the team. And I took it as a systems engineering problem, first of all. What do you have a systems engineering problem? You think about what your stakeholder needs, your stakeholder requirements. You take it down to systems requirements. So I started with, so what are the goals of the team? What are we expected to do? What does our stakeholder expect us to be doing? And I decomposed this down to a small number of requirements. So there was about 10 in total. I could have broken it down to a lot more granularity in that. It's quite feasible to go and do that. But I wanted something that was still very high level to go and work with. A, because of the fact otherwise this turns into a 100-page paper rather than just being the 6 that we're allowed. But also because the fact that I didn't want to go and make my own life a bit difficult for this. And then from each requirement, I've then gone and saying, well, what do we do that satisfies that requirement? What do we do that actually is part of that? And there is a little bit of overlap between the functions and the requirements that you'd expect that because you'd expect some things to go and satisfy more than things. The way I actually looked at the functions was use cases. Now, I could have gone and done a more standardised block diagram of functions, decomposed, as you'd sort of expect from a functional architecture. But I went for use cases because, first of all, I expected the block diagram sort of to have a little bit of overlap in them. And I also wanted to represent in there the concept of including a use case. So you'll have a top-level use case, but it might include something that's common to some other function thing. But also I wanted to capture the extension use cases where what happens when something doesn't go quite right? What happens when it's not quite happening the way you expect it? I wanted to go and get those cases in there because I felt that would be relevant to the analysis because when you think of the functional team, when it's going really well, you can say to someone, can you take care of this? And you only really need the expertise when it goes wrong to go and look at some of these things. I wanted to capture some bits of that. And what I also did was I started from what we had as what our team did. And because of the fact I had a team of gurus, my top-level functions were all very, go and do this, manage that, do that. It's all very high-level what you do. So I decomposed it into use cases, going down and down in granularity to get to the point where I felt that I had a definition of functions that matched someone who didn't have the engineering knowledge, was starting in their career, maybe, and was aimed at more of that relatively inexperienced person. And what you can see in my diagram there, which is in the paper, the far left line is your guru line, and each time you come down, you're breaking it down into something that's more decomposed and more defined. So the next one. So then, how do you define roles? And there was a number of ways I could have looked at this. One of the things I looked at first was Sheared, which is quite a seminal paper everyone knows, defines what roles of systems engineers in there. The reason I quite quickly got rid of that was because of the fact that a lot of my tasks would fall into her glue role that she defines. There's a lot of stuff we do which is actually gluing things together rather than sort of your requirements role and your pure design role. So I sort of took a definition that's a sort of aligned to what you'd see as an apprenticeship. So You have your assistant, first of all, who's probably a non-engineer, or they're training to be an engineer. They're not really qualified in anything. Then my technician is probably an eng tech. Now, I put a question mark over ASEC because I thought, well, could someone who's got a sort of technician, maybe they've got a level 3 qualification, could they do the INCOSE ASEC? I think possibly. I think there's a possibility they could have done, but they're probably an eng tech. You've got your journey person who's probably got an IEng, is almost certainly could achieve ASEC, and they're sort of working their way up their career, learning experience on them. Then you have the ones I added in extra because they're not really part of the roles, is the team lead and guru, who are both a CEng, CSEP type person. Maybe your guru could even be an ESEP in some cases. They're there to make my models fit together, because otherwise you have lots of blank gaps. They're effectively your experienced people who are in the team. And there's a sort of implied progression towards the left here that's going on, that you'll accept. You might have someone who comes in assistant, becomes a technician, then goes journey person, that ends up as a guru, and the guru might, after a few years of leadership, go and decide, I fancy leading teams instead. So there's an implied progression across there. Going back to my path, I started as a YTS person, technical assistant, so right down at that bottom level, doing your level 3 qualification. But I skipped over the technician because I managed to get to university off that and ended up on the journey person route eventually. So it doesn't mean you have to go through these levels. You can skip over them, obviously. So what I did then was, for each of these roles, I looked at the competencies in the INCOSE competence framework and said, what would be the minimum starting competence to start that role? Not the mid or the final, but where's the minimum? Where would you expect them to be in order to go and perform that role? I interpret it very literal and generalised it because it's quite difficult. There's a lot in that framework. I'm not sure how many people have come across that one. But so if it says that you're a supervised practitioner, I'd say, well, that's someone who can do the work, but it has to be checked. Someone that more experienced has to be looking at that before it gets authorised. They can't do it themselves. Whereas a practitioner, you'd expect them to be putting the work out there and doing it on their own autonomy. And if you've got awareness, you know the subject, but you're not really. You might not be practicing it that much. You might not be doing it. You know about it. My assistant has 0 competence, which is a limitation of the competence framework, because it starts you that you've got knowledge. It doesn't start you that you've been exposed to it but didn't realise it, because a lot of these people at the bottom they might not realise they're doing systemization or doing something that's system thinking, but actually they just don't realise it. So I think that's where I was sort of struggling with the framework. And you'd go up, you say you're a technician, you would expect them to someone who you might have to look at what they're doing so they have awareness of things when they start in. You're going to bring them in with probably an awareness, but you wouldn't expect at the very starting point for them to be able to go and do things very well. And when you've got a journey person, they've come in, they've got a level of knowledge, therefore they've got a much wider knowledge, they've got some skills, you can lean them to do things, you don't need to go look after them. So you can see it's grown there. It's grown as how much competence you get. And the guru is sort of you've been there for a few years, you've built up competencies in a number of areas. Now, the important thing to point out here is these are just the competencies that I felt was important to the role of the team. These aren't all the competencies. And we're just assessing what's needed for the role. If you take a typical systems engineer, a guru for instance, the likelihood is they'd have every competence in the competence framework to a level, and probably to practitioner at minimum, probably at a higher level than that along the way. So the reality of a person is they're probably going to be greater than what these show. And the other expectation I have got here is that the technician might start at that point, but they're very probably going to look at the end of their technician period, very much like the starting point of a journey person would be where I'd expect them to go and get. So it sort of bounds where you expect to be. The other thing which I found quite interesting here was that when you look at the systems engineering level 7 apprenticeship, UCL, like for a few universities I think are running that one, when you look at the competence expectations of the person who's come out the end of that, that looks very much like the guru. So you're saying that someone who's done that type of qualification is pretty much close to what I think a guru might look like. Maybe lacking a little bit of experience in a specific area. The difference here is that you'll see that on my map here, because it's a requirements team, requirements definition, I've got that at level 4 for the guru, because I only need the guru to be an expert in that particular area for this particular team's work. I don't need them to go and be an expert in everything. Right. So the next thing was, let's take the function of the team and look at who does what. How do I allocate those roles? Whereas typically we use the Raki allocation method on lots of our team tools, I went for RASCI, which adds in support, because I wanted to not just say who does the work, who's accountable, who's consulted, but who could support the doing of that work, because that's the key point, because the roles will still be allocated to an experienced person, but they're going to have maybe someone who can support it. So you might say, I can do this work, and the lead's always accountable because it's their team, they own it, so they're accountable for everything that happens in that team. The guru has a role to go and give people advice, and it's often the journey person, more correctly there, who's doing most of the work here, with support from your technician and your assistant. Now, what I found is that well-defined tasks could usually be supported by people down the chain, and it was only the complex stuff which actually had to be done by someone who's got the experience to understand what they're looking at. And because when you go and do this and you go and write it down and you come down the next day and think, oh, I don't agree with what I say there, writing the rationale was actually probably the most important thing I did there, to go and understand what I'm doing and what I'm looking at. What did I find? And let's go spend a little bit of time on this one. It wasn't surprised it'd be what I would expect all of you would expect to see. So the leader's approving, the guru is consulting, the journey person does the work, and there's things that are supported. Now, when you look at these functions, the other important fact to consider, especially when you're looking at how people work with these, is for each function, how much of your time you're spending in there. It's like a computer function. If you watch your idle function on your PC, it's probably taking 80% of your processor time or something silly like that. And it's similar here, that there's certain tasks we do that are most of the work, and there's other tasks that we do are less of the work. So delivering, our main job is delivery. That is predominantly what we get involved with. That's probably 65% of the work, I would estimated. we have things like doing the processes, looking at the tool and templating, talking to the basically other people to go and make sure things are interacting correctly, which take up the rest of the thing. But delivery, I reckon, was about 65%. Could be higher than that. It's a judgment call on there. So if we take delivery, and it's because we're doing it all the time, it's a very well developed, well-defined set of tasks that we can go and define. There's a very large aspect in there for the technician and assistant to actually go and support that you can see. So that journey person's got an opportunity to say, these people here, they can go and help me with these because these are tasks that I think I can go and hand off for them to go and do to free me up to go and do some other things. And that's sort of where I wanted to go to say, well, yes, there is a justifiable reason why the work we do is not, it has to be done by these really horrifically qualified people who really have got 20, 30 years experience. There is a room there for other people in the team to come in and go and do the work. You still need your guru there to go and offer you advice when you get something that's not quite right, that you think, well, I'm not quite sure about this. They're still needed to go and consult, to go and give advice. And you still want the actual task ownership itself to be with the qualified person who's signing off, who's checking the work to make sure it's done correctly. Now, when you go and look at something that's less delivery, less doing all the time, so I've got tools and templates, which is a processing aspect. You really need the experienced people doing that. And there's less opportunity for someone who's less qualified, less experienced, to go and get involved in that because they haven't got the ability to go and know straight away, okay, we need to go and do this because I know this tool very well, or what the catch-all's on there. And we're dealing with tools like doors. There's a certain amount of what you do with doors is that you learn from experience some of its little niggles that it's got, some of its behaviours. That's quite true, quite a few of them. So when you looked at the other process areas, there was less opportunity. Now, because you might want people getting involved in running the process, the reason I've still got a little bump for your technician, your assistant in there is because you still want them to read over the process to make sure that it's understandable to them to go and say, yeah, that's right, I understand what I need to go and do there. So they have a role, but it's in the less of putting it together, more checking that they understand what you've given to them. Now, I'm not sure if this would be where this was what I would have expected to found here. I'm not sure if anyone would have said, "Oh, no, that's a shock and that's a surprise." I think all of us would have expected to see something very similar in this. That it's going to be, yeah, there's a room for this, and we know what's happening here. Good news is I've got one of these left, which I'm running seriously under time, but never mind. So, what's the future? Where do I go from here? There's two areas that I need to go and do the allocation, but they're less than 10% of work, so I think I've got most of it covered. I could do with the stakeholders in this process having a look over my model, making sure that I haven't done anything too silly. I think I'm right. The people who've looked at it said think it's right. So that's just a nicer process step. It hasn't been reviewed with everyone who's seen this. But what I'm sort of suggesting here is that we've got the start of what looks like a development framework for systems engineers in my team to come up through gaining experience as they go along. Because if you're an assistant and you want to be a trainee, you need to do a level 3 apprenticeship. Okay, we don't have a level 3 systems engineering apprenticeship yet. That's possibly in thing, but that's something that could come along. If you've got your level 3 apprenticeship and you're a trainee and you're a journeyman, then you'd probably do a level 5-6 apprenticeship. That would get you to that sort of area. Obviously, don't have a systems engineering one of those yet either. That's maybe something, hopefully that will come in time. The one thing I when I was talking about the jobs earlier on, although a lot of the jobs of systems engineers, you see them with graduates on there, you do see a few systems engineering apprentice roles going on there, Sellafield, Leonardo, I know straight away. But when you look at what the qualification that they're going there, it's not a systems engineering qualification, it's a mechanical or electrical engineering degree, but they're giving it the experience you're gaining is in systems engineering. So, which is appropriate to the nature of those industries. So you'd almost expect a civil engineering, system engineering to be, you do a civil engineering degree and systems engineering on the side. I'm not sure how well that would fit, and obviously journeyman to guru looks like a level 7 apprenticeship on the CMAP one, which it expects. That sort of looks like it's getting to the right area. I'm not sure how I would define the journey path to a lead at this point in time, whether that's because that's a different skill set. It's not so important technical, and it's more looking at the management, soft skills, personal skills type aspects on there. The other thing I found from this is that I was quite heavily limited by the INCOSE System Engineering Competency Framework because it's got no granularity down at those low skill levels. So if you're talking about apprentices of sort of level 3, 5, 6, I don't think it covers them very well in how you assess them. That could have been how I inferred that framework. And plus the fact it's only looking at systematic competencies where actually from person you want a wider competence framework, which is why sometimes we look at some of the slightly wider ones. And for, say, a requirements team using doors, the tool competencies are actually important as well, that you go and have people who look at the tools. So I think there's an argument that we have to sort of maybe augment the competence framework a little bit to go and add in the extra things that are important to us and the extra skills that are important to us to how we develop people and define how those work as well. But being a system engineering conference, I started with the systems engineering competency framework. And that sort of gives me some work to go and look at in terms of looking at those frameworks and then looking at this, how it all works. Now, for my future, yes, I have my gurus there, but I've gained a journey person into my team. Hopefully should be starting soon. That means I've got someone to go and practice this with and see how it works out, how that this fits in with what she's doing and where she's going to go to. And hopefully that, because she's on the level 7, that's path to guru is where she is. I'd like to go and gain some of the other ones down the bottom, my apprentice and technician in time. But we'll see where that goes to. So, any questions?
Thank you very much for delivering that. A really good presentation, Mark. Can I take any questions? Yes, we've got one.
Thank you. So, Giles Paulson from UCL Centre for Systems Engineering. So I lead a Level 7 apprenticeship programme for UCL. I don't know if this is a question or an advert, or it was a question or a comment. But what I'm thinking about, let me form it as I speak. So the idea of the purpose of a Level 7 apprenticeship, we have a challenge as an apprenticeship provider that we have very strict strictly audited to ensure we are not teaching information that people already know. So we cannot draw down from a levy funding. We can't take payment for teaching things that people already know. Okay? So this naturally drives us and encourages us to recruit people onto the programme who have some experience, but they're at the very beginning of their career, maybe a year or two into their experience as a systems engineer. Because if they have too much experience, we have to assess them and make sure that we do what we call recognition of prior learning. We basically remove items from their curriculum to make sure we're not teaching them stuff they already know. So I guess it's in a way a little bit of a challenge of whether level 7 sits in that position on that chart on your previous slide, or whether there's just some confusion here about the role of different levels and whether it's about experience or the type of role that you're doing.
I think the end point of level 7's fairly defined, that you're going to take someone and push them out who's probably going to be almost near CSET, almost at the point that they've got a lot of the competencies. The reason I sort of put it where it was is because when you look at the website, it says the entry conditions are you have to have a Bachelor's of Engineering. So it's almost inferring that you've got a minimum stage. But obviously, accepting that if you've got someone who's come in from straight from university, just done their 3-year bachelor's, and then going straight on to CMAP, that's a different factor from someone who's done a 3-year apprenticeship up to a level 6 standard, and therefore has got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. It's a different place to be, isn't it?
Yeah, I think just one last point on that. So on the endpoint assessment, which we have to do for apprenticeships, so this is separate. It's a non-integrated degree. It's separate to the MSc programme, which underpins the level 7. So it's externally assessed. The levels at which they're looking to get you to when we look at the INCOSE competency framework is nothing higher than a practitioner. So they're looking across your knowledge, skill, across your competencies. They're looking at, they accept that maybe a third of them might be just at awareness level, so just very basic understanding of what the term means. The majority probably sit at supervised practitioner. So you have someone in the job who's supporting you in doing that task, and probably maybe another third you're at the practitioner level. Nothing at lead practitioner, certainly nothing at expert or anything.
Yeah.
So I think that I just wonder whether there's a little bit of a disparity here between assuming a level 7 must be the most advanced, experienced, when perhaps it doesn't.
That's a fair point. That was me reading the actual guidelines on where you're expected to be, which is actually quite complex in how it's been written for the different levels, because it says you could be this point or this point, you have to have this many at this level type thing. So
as I say, it's less of a question, more of an observation.
It's a fair point.
Afternoon, Luke Hamlet from Leonardo. Thank you for that, Mark. Now that you've had a chance to look at this piece of work, upon reflection, looking back on it, do you feel that there are any roles that might be missing looking forwards, or are you happy with the amount that are there at the moment?
You mean within the actual team structure of how I've actually defined the roles in there?
Just more of a query of looking to the future. Are there any that you think that might emerge as a part of looking at things in a broader context?
Yes, I think there will be, because it's somewhat of I thought for requirements management, this is a little bit siloed, and the reality is that we want to go and move people across into other areas. So you wouldn't say have a person who spends their career all in requirements management. You'd actually want to go and put them in other areas and learning other skills. So I think you'll find eventually that there'll be some maybe subsets of the roles, rather than actually the broad roles might still stay true, but you might find people who are at different levels in different places. But I think there'll be some integrative element in the end that will go maybe higher level, rather than just having. I mean, my gurus know requirements management very well, but if you're even better would be someone who knows a number of different aspects of systems engineering, because then they're not just a guru for my team, they're a guru for these other teams as well. And that's a very integrated role, effectively, when you get.
Thank you.
UCL Central Systems Engineering again, Matt Wyndham this time. This is about the context, seems to be about scarce resources, and there's a few papers being presented this conference, all look about the scarcity or the value of specialised resources. So I'm inferring, let's assume that I know nothing about systems engineering for a couple of seconds. I mean, I'm inferring that the context is you create some sort of scope of work, and then you acquire resources and you create a team to do that work exclusively. Are not other models available in principle, such as the hospital model, where the consultant looks for narrow time slices of several cases every afternoon? Meanwhile, more kind of available resources, the juniors and the nurses, actually carry out the plan. Is that viable for either your case or systems engineering in general? And if not, why not?
Am I allowed to defer that question to someone else?
Hazel Woodcock, SCS. We kind of could. The team that Mark's in is a team of specialists for requirements management, and we've got other teams in the wider team looking at change management, configuration management, and we have the specialists who are doing the same thing across multiple work packages. We could just as easily have people who are dedicated sliced the other way, so we're looking at work packages and having them do a number of different things across that. The way the work goes and the level of detail that we're looking at with the consistency of the data that we need, it works for us to have things cut in the direction they are. Having said that, we've got a lot of vacancies and we've got people who are happy to move between those areas. So there is potential for slicing it the other way. I don't think it much matters how you slice it, apart from a kind of career development point of view, that if you do slice it the other way, then you're giving people more variety, but you probably lose a little bit in terms of efficiency, particularly as we get through to signing things off. The way we're working at the moment, you get two sets of eyes on something, whereas if we cut it the other way, you'd only get one set of eyes on it. So yeah, that would be a viable option.
Hi, Andy Wall, Atlas Electronic UK. Thanks for the presentation, I thought it was really good. I'd just be interested to know if you had any data on other sort of sources of going into systems engineering. So we've got a graduate here. What level would you put her at? So she's not a systems engineer graduate, but a STEM graduate. So what role would you put for her?
I think this is the advantage of the competence framework, is that although you might not have a systems engineering degree, you've got a STEM degree, and it goes for any engineer. If you look at the competencies, most of people with STEM degree, they've got a certain amount of some of those competencies in there, and you can say, well, I've got some of these, and these are the ones I need to train up. And it effectively becomes a development plan to say, well, this is a role I want you to move into, and therefore, in order to get from this where you are now to where we want you to be, this is a development plan to go and get this in. I think we need that flexibility, because if you get people who are changing career, doing things later in there, which we've got, then you're going to find they've got strengths in some areas, weaknesses in other areas. Therefore, you need to help them develop on those ways. So I think if you say, oh, you're one of these and you have to be in there, it's very inflexible. It's sort of, well, here's where we roughly thinking this is what we think you need to go and do. But you then have to still say for each individual person, say, well, this person's here, this person's there, this is their competence, this is where they are roughly. Because once you do assessment of competence, you can say, well, you're above or below the line, or you're almost at the next point here. And then you can look at, this is what the deltas are, and this is what I want to go and train, to go and let you know. It's like, I could take a person in as in one of these roles, and they might never have touched doors. Therefore, I know I'm going to have to train them indoors. That's the first thing there. If they've not touched any tool, now if they've touched doors next to Gen, TCSC, one of the other tools that's in there, they have an idea of all the concepts in there. They'd be able to go, so that's less training to be involved. So you effectively have to go and say, yeah, this is where you are, this is what you know, this is what you need to know. Let's go and work on that as your development model of where you're going to. If that makes sense. Rather than say, oh, what, you can't do a one-size-fits-all. You never can, not with people.
Any more for any more? We've got time for another question. Go on, Steve.
Can't escape yet.
Hi, Mark. I'm Steve Turner, Professional Development Director. We recently had our first ever EngTech in INCOSE UK. It's quite a big deal. Do you think there are individuals out there practicing right now who are at that sort of EngTech level? And if you think they're out there doing the work right now, how do we get them to register to be EngTech? What's the incentive? How do we get more of them? We'd love to have more of them.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's the potential for people out there, and I think in most cases they won't realise that they're doing systems engineering. If you take my first role as a YTS trainee, the first thing they had me doing, because it was boring and none of the other engineers wanted to do it, was putting documents into the lifespan change control system. I'm not sure how, if there's anyone here who's old enough to go remember lifespan. Anyone going to admit to it? Yeah, there's one over there. The engineers hated it, but they said, oh yeah, training. So I'm straight away doing systems engineering, change control and configuration control. I'm doing systems engineering. I was doing other things as well. So I think there's a bit of it which is, we have these people there and they're doing bits of it that they don't realise it. And it's about education and making it more widely acknowledged. And I think it's easier in a company that does a lot of systems engineering to identify those. There's people in our team who are arguably admins, but I see the potential that they could probably become a technician with training and time. And it's just encouragement to go that way. So whether they then step it on to the next stage. I mean, so yeah, I think that they're out there. It's just finding them and identifying them, which is the struggle. But do you go and then, if you spot them as EngTech, do you then encourage them to go and develop further to become their IEng, their CEng later on, which is a slightly different skill set, but...
Are you asking me? Absolutely they should, yeah. I think so. And I think that's, maybe there's a misconception perhaps, but it can be a ladder. You don't, if you find yourself at EngTech or IEng or whatever, you can still be working towards the next one up on the list. But yeah, I think so. Yeah, it should be.
Thank you. That's all we've got time for, so could we get another round of applause for Mark?